Welcome to another program in our series on Free Thinking Forum. It's my great pleasure today to have with me the Representative Paul Thissen.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
And Paul, you were Speaker of the House back in 2013.
That's right, yes.
And 14.
Right.
And I understand that the Washington Post named you the emerging star outside the Beltway.
Yes, which I think probably had more to do with everything we accomplished as a legislature with Governor Dayton in 2013.
Oh, you didn't do it alone.
So that's right. But we had a really productive couple of years, and I think that was what they were talking about.
Yeah, the first significant investment in early childhood education in Minnesota history, all day, every day kindergarten for every 5-year-old in the state, 2-year tuition freeze for the public college and university students, and the legalization of same-sex marriage. That was really quite an accomplishment.
A lot of those, it was a great couple of years, and I think served Minnesota really well.
And how would you grade the 2015 session?
Well, after the initial session ended, I gave it an F. I think with the special session, it probably improved to a D, because primarily because of the governor's insistence on more education funding. And, so at the end of the day, we put a lot of money, new money into education, which is great. But there was still a lot of, the reason I gave it such a low grade is our opportunity was so big. We had a budget surplus.
$2 billion.
The economy is coming back, everything kind of is lining up really well for Minnesota. I mean, there's still Minnesotans who are struggling, but as a state, we're doing pretty well, and we could have just done so much more.
Hey, I've heard of a do-nothing Congress. Was this a do-nothing legislature?
I mean, it kind of was. I mean, basically, the legislature decided to pass on a lot of the big issues. Transportation, nothing really significant accomplished there at all. A tax bill wasn't passed, so no property tax relief. Again, at the end of the day, we were able to get a decent education bill out, but aside from that, really it was, kind of just punting on so many issues.
And the majority didn't elect you Speaker of the House again.
Well, no, when you lose the election, lose the majority, that doesn't happen.
So we need a little more of your kind of legislator in order to
I would like that, yes.
In order to get something done.
I think that's true.
Missed opportunities.
I think that's true.
So what were the big differences in priorities this session between the House Republicans and the House Democrats?
Well, I think first of all, education really was a big difference. In higher education, as an example, we did the college tuition freeze. We could have done that again this year. The House Republicans chose not to do that. On education, their initial education bill was only a 0.5% increase for school districts, which school districts,
not enough.
Well, across the state, everybody said that would lead to teacher layoffs, that would lead to bigger class sizes, program reductions, and to do that in a time of a $2 billion surplus made no difference. At the end of the day, Governor Dayton insisted on a lot more. And the other big difference was, the Republican proposed basically a $2 billion in tax cuts with our $2 billion surplus. And to pay for other things, they were going to cut health care by $1 billion.
Oh my God.
And those, tax cuts that they proposed and passed largely went to large out-of-state corporations that own big properties, that own the IDS Center, that own the Mall of America. That's where the benefit of it would have gotten, not to middle-class Minnesotans. So that was a very big difference in priorities between where we would have gone and where the Republicans went.
And oil train safety became an emerging issue with the problems on the train.
Yeah.
This is a significant issue, isn't it?
Well, no. I mean, if you when I travel around the state, it's one of those issues that kind of comes up organically.
So what did the legislature do about it?
Yeah. Well, we've seen all these oil train explosions across the country, and again, the legislature really punted on the issue. I think we put $5 million more dollars into some additional inspections and that kind of thing, which is okay. But what we had proposed was some railroad safety crossing changes to make those crossings more.
Well, I understand that these oil trains are going under the target field now.
Well, they can once. Yes, I mean it's a serious issue that we need to take advantage of. And what we were proposing is to ask the oil companies and then the railroad companies, which are actually making very significant profits now because of the increased traffic, to put more money into making sure that the way that they're making that profit, which is using our railroads, or railroads through our communities, is to pay a little bit more to make sure they're safe and that our communities are safe. And the Republicans refuse to ask the railroad companies to kick any additional dollars. And so that's why we kind of got stuck on that issue.
Now, you've authored the Working Parents Act, even though you were serving as House Minority Leader. Yeah. Tell us about that legislation, why it's so important.
Well, the reason it's important is because I think everybody will understand, who's out there working right now, that the workplace has changed a lot in the last 20, 25 years. And we started in 2013 and 14 with some changes. We raised the minimum wage. We made very significant improvements in making sure that women got paid equally to men. We haven't made the progress yet, but we put in place policies that are going to move us in that direction. And what this does is recognize that there's other things out there that that families need and workers need some additional flexibility in their lives. So it's things like earned sick leave. If you don't want, if you're working at McDonald's and you don't have that benefit, and we don't want someone who's sick having to come in and have to make a choice between either making their wage that day or getting fired or staying home to take care of themselves. And so there's a public health issue there, but it's also paid family leave. So if you have a baby or if you need to take care of an aging loved one who is sick, you'd get a chance to take some time off, and we would all contribute to that. And then wage theft is another piece of it. There's $30 billion worth of wage theft in this country. So that's people who have worked, have earned that money, and aren't being paid. And we think that we should have some additional enforcement and some additional rules around that to make sure that if you actually work an hour, you get paid for that hour.
And fair scheduling too, wasn't that?
Fair scheduling is the other piece of it, and that really has to do with, it's when you're raising a family and then the night before you find out either you're not going to be paid on a day because they don't need you to come in, or they say you got to come in today because we're short other people. That kind of wreaks havoc on people's family lives and their ability to kind of plan ahead. This would allow you some lead time that the employer would have to give the employee some lead time before they change their schedule.
That's important.
It really is.
Thank you for doing that.
Oh, it's a great piece of legislation, and we really hope we can make some progress next year, and if not next year, keep talking about it with Minnesotans, because these changes are really important. And the city of Minneapolis is actually going to move on some of these things more quickly, and I think that's really exciting.
Good.
But it's a conversation we need to have as a country. What should our workplace look like in the 21st century with more women working?
Yeah.
And with our economy changing, so it's more of a service economy. All of these things, it's a conversation we need to have.
And is there any other state that you modeled this after?
Well, other states have had pieces of it, yes. Now, the wage theft
but you managed to bring it all together here.
We're bringing it all together because we think, it's an important package to talk about the workplace in general. And and we really want to continue that conversation.
And you were the chief author.
Well, yes, you're welcome. It's great. Yes, it's a good piece of legislation.
Now, the previous legislature, as we mentioned, froze tuition for all Minnesota college students. But what will happen this year on tuition and student debt?
Well, again, we had this $2 billion budget surplus, so we could have continued that tuition freeze. But so what the legislature did this year, they did freeze tuition at two-year colleges. At the MnSCU institution, there are two-year colleges. But for four-year universities, both in the MnSCU system, so places like St. Cloud State and Minnesota, the University of Minnesota Mankato, or Minnesota State at Mankato, and at the University of Minnesota system, tuitions are gonna go up by anywhere from 1.5% to 4, 5, 6, 7%.
Ooh.
And that
7%.
And for some students, and so. One of the things I hear most about when I'm outdoor knocking and talking to families, parents and kids, parents and they're not really kids anymore, but young adults, is the significant impact these tuition increases we've seen over the last decade have had on their ability to balance their budgets, to get started in life, to buy a home, to choose the job that they're best suited for. It's really been a drag on our economy, and we need to do much better on making sure that higher education, that opportunity, which really sets the stage for everything else, right, in your life, that people have access to that if they want it. And by not taking advantage of this budget surplus to invest in education, just made no sense to me.
Now, many people across Minnesota saw a kind of chaos there at the end of the session. But does the legislature need to do something to improve openness and transparency?
Well, I think this, this is my 13th session, and I think this year was worse than any other year in terms of how the session ended, in terms of lack of transparency, lack of public hearings, lack of even legislators knowing what was in the bills.
Even taking away the powers of the state auditor.
Yes. Oh no. I mean, and there's a substantive discussion around that, and it was not the right policy decision. But the way it happened was it was just inserted in a bill, 12 hours before we adjourned, in the middle of the night, and then it's dropped on people's desks, and they have to vote or not vote for it. We had one bill at the end of session.
That's no way to legislate.
Well, no. One bill, the last Jobs and Energy bill, came to us with 3 minutes before session had to adjourn. 79 pages. No one had read it. And the speaker didn't allow any discussion of it and went right to a vote, and it passed. Now that's one that the governor did veto, and it was improved somewhat, but it was a terror. So I think your question is a really important one, and I think there are things that we can do to improve transparency. We can set better schedules. We can make sure that every bill gets heard in the actual conference committee that it's supposed to be heard in. But at the end of the day, it also has to be a culture change. And I think it's that the people of Minnesota have to insist that their legislature operate under the rules that most businesses, most people would expect them to operate. We're in the people's business, and the people should be able to participate.
Well, I think I speak for the people of Minnesota in saying we demand it.
Yes. Well, and I hope, and as I've talked to people,
we need to speak up.
As I've talked to people since session, it is the thing that they most often bring up, just the kind of how poorly the session played out and how it ended, and their frustration with that. So I hope that there's an energy around that.
And the legislature didn't even finish their job on time this year. The big sticking point, the early through 12, E through 12 education funding.
Right.
Was this special session really necessary
to
do that?
As it turned, it shouldn't have been. We should have been able to, the legislative leaders should have been able to get their work done on time. But I am glad that the governor vetoed that bill because what it meant was additional $125 million more dollars, most of which is just going to our school districts in money that they can use flexibly to do what they need to do, plus some additional money put into early childhood education, which I think is probably as good an investment as we can make as a state. So it wasn't really necessary because the components could have been there 2 weeks earlier, but I am glad that he did it. And not just for that bill, there were also some changes in the environment bill that I think improved that bill. Not as far as I would have liked to have seen it improved, but certainly improved that bill.
Now, we still have over 16 minutes. Transportation, a lot of us thought this would be the transportation session, but very little got done. What happened? Is this still a top priority?
Well, it should have been, and everybody talked about that this was going to be the transportation session. Unfortunately, what happened is we got into a situation where, first of all, there was a long discussion about what the real need was. Now, I think one of the good parts of this session is we actually made progress where both Republicans and Democrats understand there's a very significant need over the long term to make these kind of investments. I think the Republicans still aren't acknowledging the complete extent of the need, particularly for transit in the Twin Cities. But we did at least make progress on that. But then, then once you figure out there's a need, you have to figure out how to pay for that need. And the Republicans had some ideas about using some current general fund money to pay for it. And I think that there's some open discussion we can have about things like the sales tax on auto parts, to dedicate that to transportation. But I think it's important that it gets dedicated. And that we also acknowledge, however, that that's not going to do it. The other piece, like so many Republican ideas this year, there was a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors in terms of how they were going to come up with the total funding package. And I just don't think we can afford that anymore.
Well, no smoke and mirrors.
Right. Well, no. I think it's not the sexiest thing, but I think one of the things in the 13 and 14 session that I'm most proud of that we did in those 2 years was actually finally get our state budget back into kind of some fiscal order. We paid back the money borrowed from schools. We paid back a lot of the other shifts and gimmicks that had been going on for building up for a decade, and got our state on good financial footing. We have a surplus for the first time since I've been in the legislature after that session, not just in the next 2 years, but into the future. And I think that's really good for Minnesota. So
It is.
the transportation proposal the Republicans put forward has some interesting ideas that we should talk about, but their unwillingness to compromise on a number of things, including investment in transit, really left us in a position where we couldn't make progress.
Yeah. Well, with the session over, are there some other big issues that you think the legislature should address next year?
Well, no, I mean, I think transportation is going to be really
Number one.
important that we need to continue to push on and work on. I'd like to see some more work done on the early childhood area and kindergarten. The scholarships, which are something that I very much support and we push. So this would be money that people could use to take to to their daycare or to their child care center and help offset the cost of that, which is a really expensive thing.
Yeah.
That's an important component, but that only helps and that helps the very poorest Minnesotans, which is one place we should focus. But it doesn't do anything for a single mom making $35,000 a year. She is still out there looking at making $35,000 a year. If she has two kids, that's probably $15,000, $20,000 in childcare costs that she has to cover if she wants a high quality childcare. That family can't afford that, and so
No.
we should have options that are available not just for the very poorest, but for middle class families too. And for working families. And I hope we make some progress on that. I hope we make some progress on the Working Parents Act, because I do think some of those workplace
something
changes.
more there?
Well, we didn't pass any of this stuff, the Working Parents Act. That was just proposed. So we need the Republicans refused to hear the bill. So we need to make some progress on some of those items, like earned sick leave and paid paid time off.
What's the bill number so we can help?
Well, let's see. It's House File. What does it say there? 1093.
93,
Yes.
yeah.
So people should contact their legislators and say this is some place where we need to make some progress. So I'd like to see some progress there. And then there's, we have a tax bill yet that we have to pass, and I hope that that's really focused, if we do some tax relief, on middle class families and not on big corporations.
Yeah. Well, I think you're reflecting Minnesota values.
I hope so.
That's your goal.
Yes.
I see from your website that you really want to focus on the Minnesota values that you
Right.
grew up with, and your family started out in Blooming Prairie, I understand.
Right, that's right. In southeastern Minnesota, my dad grew up on the farm there, and my mom is from Minneapolis. Went to Minneapolis Roosevelt.
And that both parents were teachers, weren't they?
Yep, both parents were teachers. My dad then was a teacher, but also a counselor and a school administrator. But he worked in St. Paul schools for close to 40 years. My mom worked in Richfield and Bloomington for a little while, for about 30 years. So they're both educators. My sister teaches in Lakeville today. So a lot of educators in the family.
Great.
It is good, yes.
Now,
It is good.
you lost one of your members of the House. He went off with his wife to Belgium.
Right. Ryan Winkler, a great representative.
I found him. He was my representative, and it was really sad to see him go.
He's a big loss to the legislature. A big loss to the legislature.
He just wanted to get out of town. Is that right?
Well, no. I think I think his family saw this as a great opportunity, and
Well, his wife was vice president and general counsel now for a hotel.
basically the Carlson hotels in Europe. Yes.
Oh,
So,
wow.
No, it's a great opportunity.
He couldn't afford
for him.
not to go.
Well, no, and I think, and more power to him. I mean, that's not a decision a lot of people would be willing to make. So, no, so he's a big loss, but I think that we're going to get a really great replacement too. So that's kind of the silver lining.
Peggy Flanagan.
Right.
And nobody filed against her.
No, she's running unopposed. The election will be, in November on general election day. And I know that she's out working very hard, still doing all the door knocking, doing everything else she would do in a contested election, but she will be the next representative for Golden Valley and parts of St. Louis Park.
Unless somebody comes up with a lot of write-in.
Unless there's a write-in campaign, but I think that's hard to do.
That would be very hard to do.
And especially against a candidate like Peggy, who...
Tell us about Peggy.
Yeah, well, she currently, her most current job is she was the head of the Children's Defense Fund here in Minnesota.
Wow.
And in that capacity, did a lot of great advocacy for kids, obviously, but she was also one of the leaders on the campaign to raise the minimum wage. And so she's worked around these kind of basic bread and butter family economic issues for most of her career. And I think, and Ryan was a big proponent of that as well. So I think she's going to bring a very interesting voice. She's a member of the White Earth Band, so she'd be another Native American in the legislature, which I think is really important.
Oh, she's not the first.
No, Susan Allen is currently in the legislature right now.
Different tribes?
I think Susan is Dakota. Yes.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And Peggy, I think, Ojibwe?
Ojibwe. Yes.
Yeah. And so, do you know yet from Peggy what anything that she particularly wants to work on, or?
No, I imagine it's going to be similar to the work, the advocacy she's done in her whole career. So children's issues, I'm sure, children's health issues, education issues, early childhood education issues, and then these economic issues, making sure families, working families, have the resources they need to make sure that their children, that they succeed, and that their children kind of have the opportunity that they need to succeed in life too.
Now, there's another House district, 43A, I think it is.
Yeah.
Where, could you comment on what's happened with the current representative in that district?
Well, I think that's in the Plymouth district. I think Sarah Anderson's the current representative. And from my perspective, I think that we could do better. That district could do better. I don't know that she reflects exactly the values of that district. Whether it's on issues of gun control, women's choice, any of those issues, or whether it's issues of being willing to invest in our public schools, being willing to invest in transportation and transit. I mean, these are all things that make a difference in that district, and I think people in that district care about. And Sarah's been on the wrong side of a lot of those issues. I mean, she has been a fairly ideological representative. Very much focused, most of the bills that she's carried, many of the bills that she's carried in the tax area, for instance, are to give big tax relief to corporations.
Really?
I don't know that that's really the direction that is going to really support Plymouth and the goals and aspirations the folks out there have.
No, she was my representative until redistricting, and I decided, no, I'm behind, in support of Audrey Britton.
Yeah.
And could you comment about Audrey, how she'd be in that seat?
Well, I think Audrey would be a better representative. I mean, she'd certainly be a better representative of that district than I think Sarah has, represent the values of that district better. Audrey has she brings a lot of integrity and policy chops. She has worked very closely with making sure that small business has a voice in Minnesota at the legislature. The chamber represents business, but largely represents really big business. And I think that voice of small business, the one or two or three employee operation, doesn't have the kind of representation that it ought to have at the Capitol right now. And so she's been working very hard on making sure that voice is heard, and I think that's a really important role.
And she's had experience in business herself.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
I think very highly of Audrey, and look forward to her getting a chance to apply her expertise there.
Yes, no, she would be, and would have been a really, really strong representative.
Yeah. We've got about 6 minutes left. Yeah. What would you like to say to the people of Minnesota?
So, well, I mean, I think that
have we covered it all?
Well, I mean, I think that the good thing about where Minnesota is right now is that our economy is doing relatively well, and our state budget is in good shape. I think we've made some really smart policy decisions, but there's some real threats that we have coming over the horizon. Mm-hmm. I think the growing diversity in the state is a real strength, but we got to make sure that some of the disparities that we're seeing, whether it's in healthcare or education, really are taken care of, because if those are allowed to grow and fester 10 years from now, we're going to be paying the price for that. I think that there's a lot more that we can do in early childhood education. Transportation obviously is something that we need to transform in a way that really works for all parts of the state. In parts of greater Minnesota, it really is about building roads and bridges and building safety and do it. And that's true here in the metro area too, but we also need these transit options. I mean, if you look at how our state is changing, what millennials are looking for in terms of a high quality of life in Minnesota, transit really is an important part of that.
They can't stand those traffic jams.
They don't like the traffic jams, and they want just a kind of a different lifestyle, and I think that's important. And
where you don't have to have a car necessarily.
well, you don't necessarily have to have a car.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we haven't necessarily hit, and I mean, the other part of our quality of life is the environmental issues, right? Making sure that, I think a huge economic advantage, plus just is so, central to who we are as a people, is our water resources. And, if you look at what's happening in California and Arizona, businesses are going to be relocating to Minnesota because they will have access to water, just a very fundamental thing. But we need to make sure we take care of that resource and manage it well. And there's a lot of threats on the horizon with regard to that. So I think that's something hopefully next year we talk a little bit more about as well, and over the next several years.
Well, and thanks to some of the work you've done already as representative, as Speaker of the House, Minnesota earned #1 state in business this year. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, that was really exciting. The CNBC, they do a assessment every year on a number of factors, and Minnesota was ranked the top state for business in the whole country. And I think if you look at how our economy is going, if you look at the type of businesses we're growing here, not only our Fortune 500 companies, which are hugely important to Minnesota's economy, but also a lot of the small entrepreneurial businesses that are growing. You can see that energy. And at the end of the day, a lot of it comes back to the investments we've made in education and in our infrastructure that were made a generation ago.
Right.
We need to make them for the next generation.
They have to have well-educated workers.
That's. I mean, if you talk to, when I talk to folks in business, the thing that they most talk about is making sure that they can attract or have here the very best talent. That's the way the economy is going. Smart. We need to get as many smart, well-educated, skilled people as we can, because that's how you build a business.
And I think the state university system is certainly responding to state colleges and universities to make sure that they have the kind of training, the students have the kind of training that will be needed by the future employers.
No, that's absolutely the case. That's exactly that's exactly the conversation we have to continue, and to make sure that the kids coming through our K-12 system are ready and prepared to get that training once they get to higher education. So that is the best place we can put our money, and we just got to make sure that it's used as effectively as possible.
Yeah.
Too.
Now, a few weeks ago, I interviewed the man, Mike Walker, who heads up the Office of Black Male Student Achievement for the Minneapolis Public Schools.
Right.
And I was so glad to see what he'd accomplished in the first year.
Yeah, no, that's kind of an untold story, I think, but
we're trying to tell it.
I appreciate that. And Minneapolis is making progress, but I mean, the point there comes back to one of the things I mentioned, these differentials or disparities we have in outcomes for communities of color or poor people or people from greater Minnesota versus, the average or the, other people in the state. It is something that we really need to pay attention, because it's not just about those communities, it's about the whole state of Minnesota. If you look at what our state is going to look like in 15 and 20 years, that's our workforce. That's the people that are going to be taking care of you and I when when we get to the stage where we need that kind of care. So it's so important that we make the right choices to lift everybody up.
And I think we're doing a better job of welcoming people from other countries. I hear refugees that might choose another state when they first arrive in the United States decide, we need to move to Minnesota.
Right, and and that is going to serve us well in the long term as we look at the demographics and what's happening. Attracting as many really smart people as possible, that makes a big difference.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Oh, thank you for having me.
For your wisdom shared with us today.
Well, we'll see.
We'll look forward to more. Come back next year with a.
So I would like to.
Thank you for tuning in. What a pleasure to have you with us today, Paul. And I hope that Working Parents Act gets passed in the coming session.
A lot of families in Minnesota really need it to.
Good.